I'm going to demonstrate how to pick up stitches along knitted fabric. I'm going to start with picking up stitches along a cast on edge. It's the same for bound off edge. You're going to poke your needle into the very first stitch in the corner. Sometimes that one's a little tighter than the rest. And I like to bend my yarn and make a little loop. And for this very first stitch, it feels like I'm lassoing the needle. Hold on to that in the same hand as my needle. I'm right-handed, so it's my right hand. And pull up a loop. And even though you might have to pull a bit on the yarn to get it through, make sure that each loop ends up on your the big part of your needle and isn't too tight. After that, it's going to feel a lot like you're knitting. So you're going to put your needle in to the next stitch, wrap like you're knitting. Here I'm doing the throwing method, and I'll switch to picking in a moment. Go in, wrap like you're knitting, and it helps to hold on closer and kind of stretching the fabric to make a bit more room. And again, this stitch might need to be a little tight to get through because it has to get close to the needle tip. Just make sure each stitch goes up onto the larger part of the needle before you move on. Most people do this too tight and you end up with an edge that is not elastic. Very similar method if the yarn is in your left hand for picking or continental style. The only difference here is that when I've caught the yarn, I will extend my index finger just to hold onto it a bit so that I can get it back through more easily. I don't do that when I'm knitting regularly with the yarn held like this, but for picking up it really does help. Now, when you're picking up along a side edge, as opposed to a cast on or bind off edge, the method is the same. I'll start it this time with the yarn on my left so you can see how that looks. But the difference here is you don't want to pick up one stitch for every row, like you picked up one stitch for every stitch before. We need to skip them occasionally, because knitted stitches are not square, and if you pick up one stitch for every row, you'll have too many, and your edge will stretch widthwise. So instead, I'm going to pick up one stitch for every stitch till I have, it's anywhere from 2, 3, or 4 is generally the right ratio, and then I'm going to skip one. So I'm skipping this space here and going into the following one and picking them up. Now, the place where I'm going in is one stitch from the edge, and this is stocking stitch. It tends to roll in. I've blocked it, but even so, it rolls a little, so my inside my fingers that are on the back side of the work here, or the inside of my piece, depending on what we're doing, are going to unroll that so I can really see where to go. And I'm going to switch now to have the yarn in my other hand. And again, my fingers that are inside, here it's my middle finger, is going to unroll the piece. I've got my 3, so I'm ready to skip, so I'm going to skip this next space that I could go and go into the following one. Now the right ratio is going to depend on your stitch gauge to row gauge ratio. So you can either measure those and do some math, or you can do a little sample and try it out to see what's right. But I often do 1, 2, 3 and skip. Sometimes it's going to be 4, just depends a little bit on your gauge. You can see there's like a little gap here on the needle. So I would do that all the way across my piece, and then I'd be ready to start a wrong side row working on my edging.